Have you ever stopped to think, what do you have in common with, say, the tallest tree in the world, or a tiny bacterium? Well, today, we are going to zoom in, way in, to find the one thing that connects every single living organism on this planet. We're talking about the cell, the fundamental unit of life itself. So let's start with the big question. What are all living things really made of? I mean, from the smallest speck of bacteria to the biggest blue whale, what is that one common building block? Well, the answer isn't just atoms. In biology, it's something way more organized, something that is, all by itself, alive. And you know the craziest part? The very first clue that helped us answer this huge question, it wasn't found in some complex animal. It was found right here, in a humble, simple slice of cork. Yeah, the stuff from the bark of a tree. It might not look like much, but what was seen in that piece of cork, it was about to change science forever.
So, our story kicks off way back in the 17th century with an observation that, really by chance, ended up giving a name to the very structure of life.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1665. A scientist named Robert Hooke is looking at that slice of cork through a microscope he built himself, and what he saw reminded him of a honeycomb, just this pattern of tiny, empty spaces. He called them cells, which comes from the Latin word for a little room. Now, he was just looking at the dead walls of old plant cells, but without even knowing it, he had just named the fundamental unit of all life.
Hooke basically opened the door, and then it's like a scientific relay race. Just a few years later, another scientist, Leeuwenhoek, sees actual living, swimming cells in a drop of pond water. Then, fast forward over a century, and Schleiden and Schwann have a huge realization. Wait a minute, all plants and animals are made of these things? And finally, a guy named Virchow adds the last crucial piece of the puzzle. Cells don't just magically appear, they have to come from other cells. So you take all those amazing discoveries, you put them all together, and what do you get? You get one of the most important ideas in all of biology, the cell theory.
So, the cell theory sounds fancy, but it really boils down to three beautiful ideas. First, if something is alive, it's made of cells. Simple. Second, the cell is the absolute smallest thing that we can call alive. And third, and this one is mind-blowing, every single cell comes from the cell that was there before it. Think about that. It means every cell in your body is part of an unbroken chain of life stretching all the way back to the very first life on Earth. And life basically uses this cellular blueprint in two main ways. On one hand, you have your unicellular organisms. Think bacteria or an amoeba. The entire creature is just one single cell, doing its own thing. And then you've got us, multicellular organisms. We're made of trillions of cells that all work together, specializing in different jobs to build tissues, organs, our whole body. But even with all that variety, there are really only two major designs for cells. First, you have the prokaryotes. These are the simple ones, like bacteria. They're small, kind of basic, and their DNA just sort of floats around inside. Then you have the eukaryotes. These are the cells that make up you, me, plants, animals, all the complex stuff. They're bigger, way more organized, and they keep their precious DNA locked up safely inside a command center called the nucleus.
All right, now for the fun part. Let's take a tour inside one of those complex eukaryotic cells. And honestly, the best way to imagine it is as a tiny, bustling city, where every single part has a very specific and very important job to do. Right at the heart of our cellular city, you've got the nucleus. This is City Hall. It's the control center, the main office. Why? Because it holds the DNA, the master blueprints for absolutely everything the cell does, everything it builds, and everything it will become. Nothing gets done without an order coming from the nucleus. Of course, no city can run without electricity, right? And for the cell, that's the job of the mitochondria. These are the power plants. They take in fuel, like sugar, and turn it into a high-energy molecule called ATP. You can just think of ATP as the cell's battery. It's the power source that fuels pretty much everything. A busy city also generates a lot of trash, and you need a cleanup crew. Well, say hello to the lysosomes. These guys are the waste disposal and recycling centers. They're basically little bags full of powerful enzymes that can break down old cell parts, garbage, and even invading bacteria. They also have this dramatic nickname, suicide bags, because if a cell is too damaged to be repaired, they can burst open and, well, digest the whole cell from the inside out. A clean demolition. And finally, what does every city need? A border with some security. That is the plasma membrane. Now, it's not a solid wall. It's more like a really smart security checkpoint. It carefully controls what's allowed to come in and what has to leave. It's all about making sure the good stuff gets in and the bad stuff stays out.
And here's where it gets really cool. Cells aren't just generic little blobs. Their shape is perfectly built for their job. A nerve cell, for example, is super long and thin, like a wire, so it can send signals over long distances. A muscle cell is packed with fibers that let it contract and create movement. It's a perfect example of form following function.
Okay, so we've got these amazing, tiny cities working away inside of us. But how do we get more of them? How do we grow? Well, that brings us to our final topic, the absolutely critical process of cell division.
So why would a cell need to divide? Well, it really comes down to three main reasons. First, for growth. Pretty obvious, right? To make an organism bigger. Second, for repair, to replace old or damaged cells, like when you get a cut and your skin heals. And third, to create the special cells needed for reproduction, which we call gametes.
Now, for growth and repair, cells use a process called mitosis. The easiest way to think about it is like cellular photocopying. You start with one mother cell, it carefully duplicates all of its genetic info, and then it splits right down the middle into two perfect, identical daughter cells.
And you can see exactly how it works right here. The cell makes a perfect copy of all its chromosomes. Then it lines them up, pulls the copies apart to opposite sides, and bam, it splits in two. Two perfect clones. This is happening in your body literally millions of times a second, just to keep you going.
But for reproduction, you need a completely different game plan. It's called meiosis. This process is special. The cell actually divides twice, and instead of making two cells, it produces four. And here is the really crucial part. Each of those four new cells only has half the amount of DNA as the parent cell. Why? So it can combine with another half later on to make a brand new, totally unique individual.
This diagram shows that meiosis isn't just about dividing, it's also about shuffling the genetic deck. Before the cells split, the chromosomes actually swap little pieces with each other, mixing up the genetic information. That's why the final four cells are all unique. This is the engine of genetic diversity. It's why you're not a clone of your parents, but a unique mix of both. So when you think about it, from Robert Hooke's little boxes in a piece of cork to the trillions of complex cities buzzing inside of you, it all comes back to the cell. Every single living thing you've ever seen or ever will see started out as just one. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does this tiny, shared unit truly tell us about the incredible power and the deep unity of all life on Earth?